Thank you so much. Yeah, again, so welcome to this climate action training on festival and event energy. My name is Anya May Hughes, and I'm a sustainability coordinator at Native Events. And I'm joined today by my colleague Noreen Lucy, who's also a sustainability coordinator with us, Michael Sorrow, who's the founder and director of Native Events, and Kira Moynihan, who is assisting with the tech side of things today, and also our sustainable communications at Native Events. So thanks again for joining us. We're really looking forward to this big topic this morning as part of the climate action training. So today is our second last webinar in the autumn series with climate and adaptation coming up next on 12th of November. So I hope that you will all register and join for that. It's going to be a very interesting one. And just a little reminder that if you haven't seen the previous sessions, they are all available on the Arts Council website, and you can access them at the link there. And this will be included in the resources at the end of the webinar. Um, so what is the focus of today's session? Well, energy is a huge topic and one of really, really great importance. And as always, we want to cover as much as possible, making it relevant to you, your festival, your event, whether that's indoor or outdoor. So the festival really kind of aims to give that brief context of how energy usage is contributing to climate change as a whole, what the Irish state is aiming to do in relation to greenhouse gases associated with energy, and as I said, to make that really relevant and focused on festivals and events and how they contribute to this. And so hopefully you can leave today with some kind of key tips and guidance for energy efficiency and reductions for your festivals and events. Some of the key pieces that we'll cover, as I mentioned already, was that snapshot on global energy, but also additionally to those things I mentioned, we're also going to have a look at some of the kind of key guides that are really, really important, some of the available funding, and then a Q&A at the end with Michael Sorrow, who has joined us for the call. So in the room today, we will have a kind of a variance of festivals and events. There's so many different types of energy users that we could have. We could have big energy users, small energy users, those with control over their suppliers, those with access to their bills and data, those who have a lot less, and people who are really just beginning the journey. So this is very much a baseline in terms of, energy knowledge, and we're trying to cover a lot here. So please do use the Q&A function in the chat and let us know what your situation is with your festival as we go so that we can make sure that we're curating it and tailoring it to you. Before we jump into this kind of brief overview of energy in the global setting, I'd like to just sense check, really where we are all at today, who's in the room, and you should be seeing a poll kind of popping up on your screens now just to ask you what your current situation is with your festival. So perhaps you're a venue that, has control with access to data and bills, or perhaps you're a venue with little control. Maybe you're an outdoor event that has some grid connection. Maybe you're not there yet at all, and maybe you're using temporary power like generators, or perhaps you're both an indoor and outdoor multi-venue based festival. So I'll just give a second there to for you all to answer that. And yeah, it's really interesting to see, I think, with festivals and events, and this is always the case across all the impact areas, there's so many different types. It's very situational. We all have different types of festivals and events, and it can really make a difference to how we approach them. And I think that's the importance of these kind of webinars coming together today to discuss and look at all of the different approaches, I suppose. I'll just give one more second there to answer. Give one or two more people. Okay, perfect. And I'll let you guys keep answering that as we go until everyone has. Um, So yeah, just to ground us in the context of why we are here today discussing energy and festivals and events, Ireland's most recent State of the Environment report from the EPA has a clear message. If we do not cut emissions, we face our climate here in Ireland becoming very unrecognisable. And we've seen recently from the floods in Spain how close to home this is and how possible all of this is in terms of happening to us very rapidly. It does also outline the key steps that we need to take to achieve this, and you will see that transforming our energy system is a key part of this. And end that poem now. Apologies. So this is a really key part for us is transforming the energy system. And there was some good, I suppose, news back in July, which you might have seen, which was that the EPA announced a 6.8% reduction in emissions for Ireland in 2023. So this is the biggest reduction that we've actually seen in emissions since we started to measure them. And a lot of this came from energy, the decarbonisation of our electrical grid, with more renewable energy, I suppose, coming online. So very much a step in the right direction, but still a lot of work to do. So we use energy in so many different ways. And sometimes this is a little bit overlooked because we are thinking about the electricity grid, but really we're using energy for so much more than that. We're using it in land and sea freight, road and rail travel, air travel, and freight. And this is the transport of all of those things that we use on a daily basis. We're also using it in buildings for concrete. We're using it in industry to actually manufacture all of those goods that we buy and that we consume. And then further to this, fertilizers, pesticides, agriculture, farming, energy used is very much in all of these sectors. And then finally, I suppose, and what we're focusing on today to bring in that scope a little bit is kind of heating and electricity for homes and businesses, for power and lighting, machinery and equipment. So that is very much going to be our focus of today as we look at both indoor and outdoor festivals. So I wanted to just do another quick poll to gauge, who has actually started to measure their energy because it's something that we're going to touch on today, and it is definitely a little bit of a challenging area. So just ask Kira to pop that poll up for everybody here. Thank you very much. And I'll give you a second. So have you been measuring your outdoor energy usage for a number of years? Do you have a good understanding of it? Have you just started to measure your energy, or have you not yet necessarily begun measuring energy usage and are looking for somewhere to start? So as you guys are answering that, I'm just going to have a little bit of a run through on global energy emissions and the wider context. We're speaking about one industry here, is festivals and events, but we must ask, why is it important to us, and why should energy matter to this industry? So the breakdown of global emissions at the moment is very much that we have 18.4% coming from agriculture, 3.2% coming from waste, 5.2% coming from industry, and this is not including fossil fuels, and then an absolutely gigantic 73.2% coming from energy. And this is created with fossil fuels. So this is the snapshot that we're very much looking at. And many things kind of contribute to climate change, but the burning of fossil fuels, as you can see, is a key contributor. And in terms of like the associated greenhouse gas emissions, they rank in the following order from worst to bad. So we have turf, coal, oil, and gas. And gas is often seen as kind of this transition fuel. It's got a very much a lower carbon density in terms of when it's burned. But recent studies are starting to point towards the fact that gas actually could be as equally damaging as oil in terms of its extraction and its processing. So this is something that really needs to be transitioned away from. And then we have the renewables, I suppose, the alternatives to the fossil fuels. And these are the likes of solar power, taking energy from the sun, hydropower, and harnessing that energy from the movement of water, wind energy, a very important one for us here in Ireland, and then, of course, geothermal energy, which captures the energy from heat in the ground. So these are kind of the areas that we're moving towards in terms of renewables. And there's a few other ones as well that I might just mention before we move on, which would be the likes of biomass, biogas, biomethane, and hydrogen. And you will have heard a little bit about these. I suppose they're a little bit more complicated. It's a bit more of a gray area. Biomass is kind of recognized as a renewable in the EU, but there's very much issues around its production, particularly in relation to land use, transport. And then we also have the likes of biogas and biomethane, which is created from anaerobic digestion. And we don't have a huge amount of that in Ireland at the moment, but we are definitely moving in that kind of direction as well and looking at these alternative options. So this is when you kind of take the gas from the likes of anaerobic digestion of slurry, it's purified, and then it can go back into the gas networks. So in 2023, the good news is that 42% of electricity in the EU came from renewables, and one third globally also came from renewables in that same year. So this is quite a positive story, excuse me. But I suppose we still have a long way to go in terms of getting fossil fuels off the energy system and renewables in. And Ireland itself has its own, I suppose, renewable energy targets, some of which you might be aware of. Very much looking to have 80% renewable electricity on the grid by 2030, and then 24% renewable energy in heat. And you'll notice a little bit of a difference there in percentages, with heat being a lot lower in terms of their targets. And a lot of this is to do with the fact that it's very much a very difficult to decarbonize heat due to its reliance on oil and gas. So now I want to narrow down the focus now that we've kind of spoken about the global emissions, and go right down into festivals and events, and having a look at, what is the breakdown of emissions and energy in festivals and events. And just to give a snapshot of energy at festivals and events, generators, and a lot of us will know all of this, given that we work in the industry, but generators are the most common way to power outdoor events in Ireland. It's very much what is available to us at the moment in terms of infrastructure. Buildings and venues are often used where there is very little control over energy sourcing or accessible data on energy use. So there are definitely some festivals and events that own their own buildings and that have a little bit more sway in terms of what they can do in terms of upgrading the systems that they're using. But for the most part, a lot of them are rented for a short period of time on a temporary basis. And there's so many different energy users. In a festival event, you have your lighting, audio, your safety signage, food traders, catering, showers, devices, all of the same things that we are using in our day-to-day lives, we are using in festivals and events. They are the energy users, and everything around us takes energy to make it as well. There's a little bit of a technological barrier, I suppose, in the events industry, in terms of upskilling that's needed in renewable alternatives, because they are new, because they're only kind of coming into availability at the moment. People are still learning how to use them in festival and event settings, trying to understand how they can actually make them work best and make them financially viable and feasible. And resourcing those renewable alternatives as well can be really challenging, sometimes expensive or unavailable. So it's about kind of investigating all of these things for yourself. The fuel costs as well, as we all know, are going up. And I think what's interesting to look at is the costs around diesel are rising, but also the cost of hydrotreated vegetable oil, which is that biodiesel that is really commonly used in Ireland at the moment for generators. That is also rising. So moving away from burning biodiesel and diesel is a really important step in the right direction and can actually be more cost effective. And again, it's about that investigation that you need to do. Um, so as carbon footprints become more accurate, we see a change in where the highest percentage of emissions come from. And I don't want to trick anybody here, but I wanted to do a little bit of a test and a poll on what you think might be the biggest emitter for an outdoor music festival. So I'm just going to pop a little poll in here for a second and give you a moment to answer that. And I just remind everybody as well here to please do use the Q&A function and the chat with anything that might come up as we go along. And we can very much come back to those at the end when we're having our Q&A with Michael and myself and Noreen. Okay, interesting. Perfect. I think one more person left to answer. Okay, so 71% of you are correct. So yeah, we're very much looking at audience transport, and you'll have known this if you were at the previous webinar, I suppose, on energy emissions. Um, Audience transport is very much the largest emissions coming from any festival and event. And then energy use is actually quite small. It's only roughly 2% of a festival or event's emissions. And this is taken from Greener Future 2023's carbon footprint, which looked at 17 UK and European festivals to get a good snapshot of what their emissions were. And what's important about this, I suppose, is that as carbon footprints are becoming more accurate, we're starting to get more information about what actually are the biggest polluters in terms of festivals and events. And these are festivals that will have been doing their carbon footprints and working on this. So they've got a really good knowledge and sense of actually, what it is that they're doing. They're measuring and monitoring across all of these different areas. So this might not be a surprise to some people, it might be a surprise to others. Another one, I suppose, is food and beverage. And when we're thinking about energy, again, we talked a little bit about all of the different sources of emissions from energy. And a lot of that is that embodied energy that we mentioned. But to give a little bit of a perspective, I suppose, we can look at the festival emissions by scope, scope one, scope two, and scope three. So scope one are very much those emissions that are within our control. So that's the likes of our on-site power from fuel, our on-site travel from own vehicles. And then scope two is that purchased electricity. So that might be relevant to you if you're in a venue or if you're in a building. And then scope three is kind of everything else. And there are levels of control within these that vary a little bit in the festival and events industry. So you'll see in scope three, you've got the likes of your waste, you've got travel and transport, and then all of those purchase goods and services, food traders, decor, merchandise, and tickets, and physical communications. And with festivals and events, you're very much designing your own little mini city. So there are levels of control within scope three, which are really important, particularly when we're looking at those emission factors in terms of influencing your audience, influencing your site infrastructure, transport, and then also managing what materials and resources that you use. And these are things that we would have touched on in the other webinar sessions on procurement and materials. But again, to just move into the energy side of things and to give that perspective shift, a lot of emissions come from scope three, but a lot of that isn't on site. Now, some of it is, as I mentioned, like waste and materials, but for on-site emissions alone, there's an average of 76% coming from energy. So if we're just looking at the emissions that we're actually producing on-site, 76% comes from energy, 24% comes from waste, and then less than 1% comes from water. So energy is a really important area to focus on in terms of your on-site direct control emissions. And that's from the Show Must Go On report in 2020, which is a really fantastic resource that we will include at the end of this webinar as well. So I'm just going to hand over to my colleague Noreen now, who's going to talk a little bit about the three-step approach to reducing energy emissions.
Thanks very much, Anya. In our energy webinar earlier this summer, we outlined a very simple three-step approach to reducing energy emissions. And the earlier webinar on energy was for buildings, but this is still relevant because I suppose as we saw in the poll earlier on, there's a mix of people in the room today. Some of you use buildings and greenfield sites for your festivals, but then some of you also are hosting your festivals in buildings. And it was interesting to note that, some of you have control over the venue or the building in terms of the energy usage and measurement, but some of you don't. So this will be very relevant for you also. And really, I suppose the first step there and the key approach to reducing your energy emissions is really looking at your usage and to try to reduce wasting energy. I think we can always be more efficient when it comes to how we use energy, and that's both in our personal lives and in our work. And it's that mindset shift, in terms of just, I suppose, really looking at how we're using energy and to look at being more efficient with energy, to reduce the energy we're using. And it's a continual process. Every year we get better at reducing the energy in terms of really addressing wasted energy. As Anya was saying, electricity, 80% of our electricity is coming from renewables in Ireland. Currently, that's improving year on year. So it's really important to look at trying to, I suppose, electrify and to really look at our energy usage and to try and have the most of our energy coming from electricity, and that is because of the fact that we're increasing the renewable energy source going into the grid. And that's really the last point there as well in terms of really looking at the renewable energy and I suppose the other sources of energy that we're using, and can we use that from renewable sources? And that's possibly more in terms of greenfield sites and festivals, but really we have to be looking at more renewable sources in our energy mix. The next slide, please, Anya. Thanks very much. I suppose just to look at how we can be more energy efficient in buildings specifically. And these are very simple actions, and a lot of you will be doing this already, but it's just, I suppose, to have that checklist and to make people aware in your building of how to be more energy efficient and to stop wasting energy. This might seem like very, I suppose, a simple tip, but it's really to turn off the equipment when it's not in use, to look at your heating, and to really to see, can you reduce your heating in terms of temperatures, turn off lighting in rooms when not in use only the lighting you need, use LED bulbs, don't leave machinery and equipment on standby, and implement an energy saving campaign with your team. Again, these might seem like really simple tips, but when we're speaking to organizations, they implement these, and it's just, I suppose, they're very easy and quick wins for organizations in terms of what you can start out to do. I suppose communication is a huge piece in terms of putting signage beside light switches to remind people to turn off lights when exiting a room. And it's really that mindset and that behavioral change in terms of really looking at how we can stop wasting energy, and then start measuring your energy where possible. And I suppose, we expanded on how to measure your energy in our earlier webinar on energy for buildings. So I would really, I suppose, advise you to take a look at that webinar in terms of how do you read electricity bills. Do you have a smart meter? Is your organization in line to get a smart meter next year? And just to really start understanding how you measure your energy. And I think from the poll earlier on, we saw that, some of you are starting to do that. Some of you are not. So it's a really good opportunity for you to really understand how do you measure your energy. And I suppose, it's looking at your energy bills. How do you read your energy bills? And if you have control over your energy bills in your building, some of you will, some of you won't. So I suppose for those of you that have access to your energy bills, it's really important to understand how you're measuring those. And we will again provide the resources from the last webinar in terms of how to do that. But then for those of you that don't have access to energy bills and you're working with venues as your festival partners, how do you approach your partners in terms of to have that conversation and to ask the venue that you're hiring, how to calculate your energy. Do they have a meter in place? And we really go through all of that as well. So there'd be, I suppose, a different approach depending on your organization and if you have access to your energy and if you don't. But really, I suppose for the people in the room, I hope that each of these three will address the situation that you're in. If you are a festival that's based in a large building with control over your suppliers for both your electricity and heating, you'll be receiving monthly bills, itemizing your expenditure and usage. If your festival is based in a large building with no access to your electricity bills or your electricity meter, and that could be that you're in a building owned by your local authority, so that you will face different challenges there in terms of how do you get access and how do you communicate with the owner of the building. But then you might be a festival that you work with multiple venue partners and you have limited control over calculating the energy usage of events at these venues. So for each of these three situations, there will be a different approach. And we'll just run through, I suppose, some of the approaches you might take. And this is, I suppose, not an exhausted list, but it's just to get you thinking in terms of how you can start measuring your energy and reducing your energy. And I suppose it's always I suppose it's always good to look at the no cost or the behavioral changes that you can make. And there's a lot of support out there that doesn't require huge capital funding or investment. The SEAI will refer to them again as a resource and will provide you with information on the SEAI. But if you haven't already, then we would definitely recommend organisations to look at if it's possible to apply for an energy audit voucher from the SEAI in terms of measuring your energy usage in your building. Again, we would, I suppose, really focus on the importance of measuring your energy usage. So analysing your bills to understand your consumption patterns, really optimizing the usage of energy efficient appliances and equipment, and I suppose to become knowledgeable in what that means. That behavioural change piece, that mindset, in terms of promoting energy awareness with your team, your audience and your visitors, using energy reduction signage and really communicating, I suppose, how you are trying to reduce your energy and sharing that with your audience. and your visitors, and then possibly looking at signing up for a green electricity tariff and just becoming very knowledgeable in what that means. I suppose the low to medium cost that you could look at is, I suppose, following on from your energy audit with the SEAI, you could look at the recommendations and what might be possible for you in terms of funding, install energy monitoring devices and systems, which again is just improving, I suppose, your knowledge of the energy that you're using, looking at replacing incandescent and fluorescent lights with LED lighting. And of course, there's varying costs to that. But just again, becoming aware of what the options are, install light motion sensors, and reviewing the possibilities of installing renewable energy systems such as solar PV panels. Of course, that will depend on the type of building you're in. A lot of you might be in heritage buildings and that's not possible. But these are just suggestions in terms of what you could do in a large building when you have control over your energy. And then, of course, if you have all the funding in the world, you can really look at those high cost options, which would be improving the fabric of your building, looking at new building management system, BMS energy systems, installing heat pumps, or district heating may be an option. But I suppose it's just to go through, if the high cost options are not available to you at the moment, then looking at the low cost options and just starting somewhere. But of course, that's if you're in a building where you have control over that. The next example is addressing the challenges that organizations face when they're in a building that's not owned by you, you don't have access to the energy. You're very limited in terms of what you can do. So I suppose you might have access to your electricity meter. If you do, then take regular meter readings to better understand your energy usage. I suppose speak with your local authority if you are in a local authority owned building, and that communication piece as well, and letting them know that this is what you're trying to do and better understand your energy usage and reduce that. To explore funding opportunities with your local authority to install renewable energy sources such as solar PV panels. And again, I suppose it's working with your team. It's not, I suppose, letting any one person manage all of this. It's really involving your entire team in terms of really trying to reduce energy across the team and in everything that you do. You might include like a procurement policy in your climate action policy and action plan, but it's really to start weaving in I suppose that energy reduction into everything that you do, and to really have that mindset in terms of that continual objective to keep reducing your energy and to stop energy wasting. And then, of course, I suppose to that point, it's looking at how you optimize the usage of A-rated appliances and equipment, and that'll be included in your green procurement. So the next time that you're replacing equipment, it's built into the green procurement. And then I suppose the last example, which I think will apply to some of you also, is that, as part of your festival, you're working with multiple venues to produce your festival. So your festival might be, you might have events in a number of venues with organizations that you partner with. You would have limited control, of course, over calculating the energy usage of the events at these venues. Maybe you've started working with the venues to calculate the energy used. I suppose it depends on the relationship that you have with the venue. Maybe the venue that you partner with is also in the process of creating their climate action policy and are also looking at their energy reduction. So, you could work with them and partner with them and help each other in doing that. But I think what's really useful is, to start out with providing a checklist for your venue partners on how to calculate the emissions used during your event. And we will provide a resource on that in terms of a suggested checklist in order to how to work with your partner in calculating the energy used during your event at their venue. And really, it's all about improving on the data collection year on year for that. So I suppose that is really focusing on buildings, in terms of festivals that are in building venues and the various different types and very different challenges that you will face. But I know that Anya now is going to expand further on festivals in greenfield sites.
Thank you, Noreen. Yeah. So I think for outdoor festivals, there's a lot of similarities in terms of what needs to be done, but obviously with buildings, it's very specific in terms of how we actually go and upgrade them and make them more energy efficient. But certainly in terms of creating a culture around conserving energy, reducing energy, and being more efficient with energy, those are two things that we can see across both, having things like clear switch off policies, etc. But for outdoor events and festivals, as I mentioned, energy usually comes from generators, either diesel or biofuels. We're increasingly seeing a lot more HVO. And one of the things that we have to be really mindful with in terms of using biodiesel is where it's actually sourced from. It's really important. Sometimes, it can be produced in unsustainable ways. So what you're kind of hopefully looking for is waste vegetable oil, waste hydrotreated vegetable oil is usually the way to go. Other areas, I suppose, of power generation that we have seen at events, which is really exciting and is coming and becoming more available to us in Europe, in the UK, and in Ireland, hopefully soon, is the likes of battery installations, connecting to the grid, hybrid systems, and solar panels, temporary solar panels on sites. And then also in some festival situations, actually installing them permanently at the venues where the festival takes place. So there's very much a three-step approach, again, for outdoor festivals in the exact same way as buildings. We're trying to reduce the power demand. A little bit different with outdoor festivals. We very much need to centralize the needs of energy to, I suppose, maximize the efficiency. So what we're talking about there is if your festival has multiple traders and multiple stages, you're not putting one out miles away in a field that's going to need its own separate generator, but that you're actually grouping energy users together in order to maximize all of the energy sources that you're actually using. And then it's about understanding those true power requirements. Again, similar in buildings, but again, maybe a little bit different where you have people coming onto a site temporarily, like caterers, etc., really understanding what their true power requirements are. A lot of the times with power users, they might say, I need this, I need that, but they don't actually understand that might be their full power requirement rather than their actual consumption. So it's really important to start those conversations and ask those questions. And then, of course, as per the three-step approach, we very much need to increase renewables and move away from diesel and biofuels where possible. And I know that that can be very challenging, particularly when we're on venue sites that are not owned by us, that we're renting. But again, it's about starting those conversations with the people in those venues and on those sites about whether or not it would be possible to connect to the grid. And I'll touch on that a little bit more as well. But just to recap on what I've said there. So, we've heard of the waste hierarchy, but maybe not so much familiar with the energy hierarchy. So it's really, really good to just have this when you're planning out any energy for an event or a festival, very much looking at prevention first, efficiency and no waste. Looking at sourcing, is it possible to use mains instead of generators? Can we use renewables for that specific activation or partnership or whatever it might be on the festival site? And if not, is there a way that we can have a hybrid system so that when we're actually coming to the nighttime of the event and there's not actually much energy being pulled, that we're using a smaller generator or a battery. And then again, it's going down to those two lower options, which is where a lot of people are at the moment, which is alternative fuels like HVO and diesel fueled generators only. But of course, it's really important. And I know that while energy is a small percentage of the overall festival emissions, as I said, from an on-site perspective and from a control perspective, it is very much that 70% mark. So for a bit of inspiration, I suppose, I wanted to show this video from Digital Festival before I get into some case studies. So Digital Festival have become the first circular festival in the world. And they have this really great series on YouTube, which kind of brings you through all of the different impact areas. So I'm going to click play now, and hopefully you'll all be able to hear this okay.
We all see the impact of climate change today.
We need to change now.
This year, Digital becomes the world's first circular festival.
Everyone knows that this is the only way to go.
In order to achieve this, we introduce new ways to convert all of our waste into valuable resources.
Is it possible to make tea out of peat?
Fully sustainable energy.
An alternative for fossil fuel?
Food can really make the change.
It can be done, and we will do it. My name is Paul Schuring from Zap Concepts. We work on the energy supply for the Digital Festival, and we do that in the most sustainable way possible. I work together with Digital since 2014. We started with the sustainable plan for the festival. In the first edition of Digital Festival, all the energy was generated by diesel generators. Then we replaced the normal diesel to biodiesel, but nowadays we don't use diesel generators at all. It's only fully sustainable energy coming from all different sources. Now we are even working to build permanent solar installations on the premises, so the festival produces more energy than it's needed itself.
Today, we are still using 19 times as much fossil fuels as sustainable energy sources. We see that digital has made the shift, but we still need a lot of effort to have the whole world making this shift.
In the festivals, there are management teams who really try to raise the bar every time. And in politics, it's people do not have the guts to make steps. And here we can show what can be done. So by going to a sustainable festival, in the end, you help the whole society to become more sustainable.
I love those videos. They're great. I think it's just interesting as well how they can make something like energy seem so exciting. But I think it's important to recognize that digital has a very similar story to any festival in that it started with diesel generators, it moved to biofuels, and then it kind of took a step back and said, what are we actually going to do here and how are we going to make this sustainable? And again, I think Paul touches on a really important subject here, which is that, you have to be brave in terms of this transition. Very much with renewables as they're coming online and becoming available to us, we need the upskilling, but we also need to sometimes take a little bit of risks and try things out and work with our partners and communicate them. And that has a huge value, not only to the festival event, but also potentially to that local authority, that city, and wider society for the people that attend them. So I'm going to touch a little bit on a festival a little bit closer to home, which is Body and Soul Festival, which I'm sure you've all heard of. Back in 2018, Body and Soul was, I suppose, working with Zap Concepts, who was in the last video, and ourselves at Native Events to do a smart power plan. So what this meant was we were very much applying the energy hierarchy by preventing energy usage and making what was there more efficient. So they looked at the quantity of generators, what they were powering and where they were located. So again, looking at centralizing that power, why are they over there? What can we do to change the way the site is laid out? They looked at syncing sets in load share configurations at the 2 largest stages and also at 2 activations. So what this means is they're putting larger generators with smaller ones so that when the load is lower, the smaller generator kicks in and fuel is being used more efficiently. And they also put in a hybrid system at the main entrance to the festival. So this is a combination of a diesel generator with renewables. Sometimes it's a battery, sometimes it can be solar. And this type of hybridization is really particularly quite good for overnight settings. So again, when you have a peak usage of energy during the day, but actually at night, the office might not be open, for example. So it doesn't really need a huge amount to keep it going, but it might need to keep the lights on, for example. Depending on what is going on. So this dedicated effort, I suppose, towards making a focused energy plan for the festival ended up saving the festival 6,657 litres of fuel and nearly 20 tonnes of carbon in comparison with the previous year. So this is really significant. And I think, again, this exercise really proved the potential cost benefit, I suppose, of doing more energy planning. Sometimes it's not about necessarily bringing in renewables if they're not available to you, but sometimes it's actually about just looking at the layout of your site. How can you be more careful about your planning and making sure that you're grouping power users together? So this was very much a success, I suppose, in the value of that dedicated focus on energy planning. And again, bringing in partners as well and that collaboration piece. And looking slightly further away from home is Shambhala Festival. So this is a 20,000 capacity outdoor camping festival in the UK. They're very much a front runner in sustainability and they've had really great success in tackling energy throughout the years. The festival is connected to the grid. It uses solar energy, biofuels, batteries, and it uses HVO in the generators that exist. But they very much have made sure that their HVO comes from renewable sources made from waste products and actually created in the EU. So again, they're doing their homework on the supply chain of what they're actually using. But to take their energy reduction and efficiency to the next level, again, moving on from now, we have actually moved on to renewables. They needed to better understand what the energy consumption of the festival actually was. So this involved the installation of more than 80 monitors across the festival on everything from food stalls to stages to lights. And they really wanted to get that kind of detailed information about the kilowatt hours that were used. So now they're the moment they're using a software with their power partner to actually, I suppose, monitor this in a very high tech manner. But before that, they were gathering this data in a manual way. A real dedication again to energy reduction, having volunteers going out checking meters, checking generators. So again, it's about making a plan and understanding what is feasible for you. You may not have access to a power partner that has this kind of technology, but you may well actually be able to have an energy dedicated group of volunteers who are upskilled in some way and able to go and check meters and take notes as part of your planning. And I suppose the importance of this is really significant. You know, they had a 3-year plan with their energy provider. They set out some clear targets for fuel reduction. And they very much like to talk about how saving fuel saves money, because the cost of diesel is absolutely rising and the cost of HVO is absolutely rising as well. And between 2010 and 2019, they have managed to reduce the CO2 of the festival by 90%, which is really, really significant. And again, a front runner in the industry, very much leading the way. A fantastic case study. And there's so much information about Shambhala online. I would really encourage you to have a look at it and see what they have done in terms of those partnerships and actually working with people and collaborating in order to achieve their goals. Another quick case study here is Øyafestivalen in Oslo in Norway. It's a really interesting festival. It's a multi-venue festival. So they do have outdoor festivals and they also do have indoor festivals. It's across the city. There's over 100,000 visitors over 5 days, nearly 3,000 people working on it, like 2,700 volunteers. It's quite a significant event. But they've very much been a pioneer again in sustainability. And it's important to have these case studies because you can really see the step-by-step process of how they started in the same place as everybody else using diesel generators. But then eventually decided to phase them out and the way they actually went about doing that. So a key piece for Øyafestivalen, which is a city festival, was to really get the municipality and the energy provider on board. And this was a big challenge for them because they actually moved location twice. But they really wanted to connect to the grid. And so in doing so, they changed from generators and they made the festival 80% more energy efficient and saved 200,000 litres of diesel between 2009 and 2018. So like we said, saving fuel saves money. You know, this is all kind of a proof of concept. And I would encourage you, I suppose, again, to look at these case studies when we send them to you and use them and talk about them when you're looking to, I suppose, create those collaborations, whether it be with your local authority, your energy provider, a sponsor, or whoever it might be. It's a really useful, I suppose, way to communicate the benefits because we need these proof of concepts. So just to kind of recap, planning for energy and efficiency can look different for everyone and everyone will be at different stages of the journey. But it's important to start by making a plan and understand what collaboration you need to achieve it, whether or not that's from the local authority, the venue, or the power supplier. And conversations about energy, you know, it's really important. They can spark those reductions as well. People just thinking about things a little bit more, communicating with all of those energy users that you have on site about, you know, do you actually understand what energy you're consuming? And just prompting those conversations to get people thinking and then beginning to formalize it a little bit more in terms of measuring and monitoring where possible. And I'm going to go through this a little bit more with the Fáilte Ireland Sustainable Festival Guidelines because it's just a really, really great resource in terms of planning it out. But as I said as well, sharing those experiences, those case studies are really, really useful. If you are doing stuff on energy, if you are doing stuff on any impact area, it's really important to make case studies out of them and be sharing those experiences with your network. So as I mentioned, the resources that we're going to be looking at is the Fáilte Ireland Sustainable Festival Guidelines, the Sustainable Energy Authority of Ireland, the SEAI in terms of that funding, and the future festival tools. So the Sustainable Festival Guidelines, yeah, like I think this is again kind of like looking at what we've already covered a little bit in here, but it gives you that little bit more detail. And this is for you to sit down and to go into planning for your own festival event. To start off, this is a really kind of useful worksheet. This is the people who are just starting out at the beginning of their journey, you know, very much in line with those 3 key steps in energy reduction and efficiency that we talked about. So it's getting accurate and understanding those power specs, having basic policies around switch off, investigating what renewables might exist. It's all about that investigation piece and understanding what your situation is, making note of it. And then where possible, also checking generators and capacities throughout your event. So maybe you don't have the possibility of doing energy monitoring to the extent that you would like, but you can certainly put in some volunteers and a team in place who can check things. So that's a key kind of starting out point. Excuse me. And then I suppose with the next phase, hopefully you're making progress. You've done that bit of investigation, and now it's kind of really key to start looking at that collaboration, you know, whether that's your energy supplier, the local authority, whether that's the traders that you're working with on site, but you really need to get that buy-in and start collaborating with people in terms of energy reduction. So as part of this, you need to be receiving more detail from your energy supplier as well. If you are paying somebody to come on site to provide generators or whatever it might be, it can be, excuse me, useful to include in contractual obligations, you know, a requirement to provide an energy report. Excuse me, something caught in my throat. And something as well that, you know, there's a spotlight on traders in this section, which is a really interesting one. They can be really big power users, and going back to that importance of monitoring, you know, one of the things that Shambhala Festival, who I already looked at, did was they actually brought in energy tariffs for their cafes and their caterings, and showed kind of, you know, encouraging them to be more energy efficient and to look at their energy consumption. And they tiered the actual price of coming on site, the pitch fee, I suppose, based on the energy that they were using it. So they tiered it essentially. And that had a really great result in terms of decreasing their energy use. People unplugging things, people upgrading, I suppose, to more efficient appliances, etc. Which again, people might not be aware of. Like, you know, they could be going to multiple festivals and events, not realizing how much energy they're consuming, or maybe they have their own small generator they set up at smaller event sites, they set up on the sides of roads or whatever it might be. And they get that knowledge and they get that learning and that upskilling as part of that as well. And then in terms of leading the way, again, and you can see the progression here in terms of we're starting with generators, we're starting to get an understanding, we're starting to monitor, we're starting to measure, and we're starting to look towards renewables. So as a leader, you know, you're very much, your collaboration is solidified, you're holding meetings with stakeholders on energy reduction, it's a priority to you, you're ensuring that you're switching to the likes of LEDs, and through your collaboration, you're very much planning to move away from fossil fuels. And this is something that every industry needs to do. So I suppose there's options that you can look at here in terms of leading the way if you're not fully able to move away from fossil fuels, which, as I mentioned, is that hybridization and that sinking. So again, it's about really speaking with your energy provider, your electricians, whoever it might be on site that you are working with, so that they can get a better understanding of what is possible based on your plans and layout of your festival. And to that note, something that's really excellent in terms of resources that are available that you can send staff on, or might be the electrician, or you can point people to this, are the Future Festival tools. So this is a free to use resource for a festival or an individual event professional. And it gives you this kind of personalized plan for your festival, or it gives you a set of guides and resources that are actually specific to the goal that you are trying to achieve. So it's kind of a self-assessment tool. So you go through it, you answer lots of questions, and then it spits out this kind of plan and resources and guide for you. So it's really, really useful. And I would encourage you to look at that. And again, we will include that in the resources alongside this webinar. I'm just going to hand over to Noreen now, who's going to speak to the funding side of things a little bit, the SEAI.
Thanks very much, Anya. I suppose really in terms of one of the key resources for energy usage and understanding measurement and emissions reductions would be the SEAI, the Sustainable Energy Authority of Ireland. And I suppose what's great about this is that it, you know, no matter where you are in terms of your energy calculations and reductions, the SEAI will have resources for you. And even if it's just starting out to understand your energy usage, the Energy Academy, you know, there are webinars, there's training, there's a whole suite of, I suppose, events that they would have in terms of starting out to understand your energy usage. You might be, I suppose, progressing on to developing an energy action plan. There's energy management training. There's a lot of resources online in terms of getting you to the stage where you can develop an energy action plan, understanding your measurements and emissions reductions. We mentioned the energy audit earlier in terms of an organisation in a building going to the SEAI, applying for an energy audit and having that completed. And there's various, I suppose, schemes then that will be available in terms of how you want to progress in terms of maybe investing in energy efficiency and renewable energy. So there will be various supports, you know, and this is being improved on continually. So it's always a good place to look in terms of the resources that the SEAI have. But then I suppose it really depends on what stage you are. And, you know, if you're that continual improvement that we spoke of in terms of monitoring and reviewing your progress, there's energy management training there too. So I think it's definitely a place to start if you haven't looked already. And I know that some of you probably have, you know, engaged with the SEAI on an energy audit, but it's really very, I suppose, useful to look at the training that they have there also and the further supports. I suppose another resource that I would mention in terms of buildings, and that's good to look at, that's on Anya's list there, is the Green Arts Initiative. Like that's another great guide to energy reduction. You can see it there, and we'll provide that as a resource. But this would be for buildings to help you understand and record your energy use, reduce energy consumption. And it just, again, goes through the practical I suppose, guide in terms of how do you read your meters, how do you understand your bills, and to really understand your activities in relation to energy use. So they're very practical and very relevant for organisations and festivals, indoor and outdoor. So they'll be included in the resources with the slides and the training also. And I think it's a great place to start in terms of, okay, what are our next steps? Where are we at? And to find those practical guidelines as well.
Thank you, Noreen. Yeah, so I think there's a lot to unpack in energy, and again, it can be very specific to the festival or event that that you are. So we wanted to do a bit of a Q&A now at the end.